Good afternoon. Welcome to the latest Straight Up Hangout. I'm Ben Parizek from Barrel Strength Design, and today we have with us Stephen Bowling, VP of Interactive at Rocket Science Agency, and Steve Adams, who freelances as Pixel Jitsu. Welcome, everyone. Today's topic is Matrix as a layout builder. And I think we all know Matrix is a very powerful tool for long-form content on Craft. And along with posting our content, it helps us control a lot of the design of the content too, and can sometimes be used entirely for this alternative reason, not really posting any content, just helping you manage the patterns you need to be managing on your website. So today we've got Stephen Bowling has graciously offered to share a few examples that he's found useful for Matrix, such as using it for site navigation, building forms, and content layouts. So I'm going to hand it over to Stephen here, and we can start the discussion. So,
all right, sounds great. All right, we have my screen up now.
Yep.
Okay, great. So I think probably site navigation is one of the more simple examples of something you can do with Matrix that you can handle completely natively in the code and not have to worry about any dependencies or anything like that. The way that I usually handle it is by setting up the main navigation areas. So I have a primary navigation area here, and then secondary navigation and footer links. So on the actual site, that corresponds with, so this area where the home is would be the primary navigation. There's so they'll show up here, and then in the footer, we can add things like legalese and links maybe to some external things. So basically, the way I set it up is a matrix that has 3 different block types. The URL block type is for linking to any arbitrary URL if you want to send out an external link. The entry block type, it lets you select an element from Craft, so that if the URL changes or the slug changes, it'll automatically update and you don't have to worry about the main nav breaking for internal links. And then if you need something like a file download or something like that in the header, you can I do an asset one where the client can select an asset and it'll make a link directly to that file. So for primary navigation, right now I have home as the only link, and that is set up as an arbitrary URL that's just a /. And so if I wanted to add a link to the About page, I would just come up here and do an entry, and the label is optional, and I'll show you when I get to code, but basically if there's a label available, it'll use it, otherwise it'll default to the entry's title. So I'll link to the About page here, and then save that. Back on the site now, we have a home and about link. So you can add as many URLs as you want, and you can rearrange them, and they'll update as you rearrange them. And then also give the client an option to add a style. So if they wanted to style it look like a button, they can do that. And then I'll go into the code now and kind of show you how I'm handling that.
Yeah, this is a nice pattern. I find us using this a lot as well in our projects with simple navigation, where you can kind of fit it all right in the globals. You don't have to add an extra plugin or get complex, and you can kind of customize all these options you're showing to whatever the project needs are, if you need extra styles or more or less control there.
Like a link icon or anything.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you can just add a drop down on those matrix blocks and let them choose some font awesome icons or something like that. So in the code here, this is going to be pretty obtuse right now because it's just a macro. So it takes the global primary navigation .link blocks, and then it handles all that. So let me pull up the macro. Okay, so let me see where that is. I think it's under UI. Okay, so the navigation macro takes an object or a dictionary of options, with links being the link block itself, and then class being just an extra string that if you, like, for example, if you wanted the nav to align to the right instead of the left, you could just pass in an extra class here, and it would do that. But it loops through the link block right here, and for each block in the link block, it pulls up another macro that handles the link, going through all the different block types in the link. So that is right here. And sorry that it's so abstracted. I didn't really break that apart, but the reason it is because I'll use link blocks for a lot of different things. Like if I set up a form redirect, or pretty much anywhere where a client can choose to have a link, like if we want to have extra links in a sidebar or something like that, I'll use that same field, so I don't have to repeat all this code because it's pretty nasty. So you pass so here's where the actual link block's handled. So it's looping through the link block. For each link block, it goes through here. So the styles field is an array. It's just checkboxes, so you could have multiple styles. If you wanted to have one that's like button and then add button primary onto that, or button rounded or something like that, you could do that. And then whether or not it should open in a new window. And then whether or not it should highlight add an active class to the button if the URL matches the button. So in the layout here, since this is for the main navigation, I'm setting up navigation include current page class true, which is gonna highlight the active class basically. So
are you handling the active class on the parent of a sub navigation and a dropdown?
I'm handling it on the link itself, so it's not on the parent in this case, but it could easily be rewritten to do that. It would be handled on right here instead of on the included class, only because this site doesn't have any drop downs.
Right.
But so here's where all the actual magic happens. Basically, it switches through the block type, and this default. I have a habit of adding defaults here because I reuse a lot of code between projects. So basically, if the field doesn't exist, it'll just default to just so it doesn't throw an error. But it switches through the block type, URL, entry, or asset, and then it sets a couple properties, so the label for the button and then the link, so that by the time it figures out, is this link block an entry or a URL or an asset, it can just come down to the bottom where we're handling actually outputting the anchor. And it has the link here. If there was a class, it would output the class. If it opens in a new window, it opens in a new window. And then if you're including it somewhere else, you need to pass in some attributes for using like JavaScript, adding some data attributes or something like that. You can pass that in as well. Don't necessarily realize how overly complex something is until you look at it like this. But once I wrote this, I pretty much never go back in this file. So where it actually sets the active class is right here. And the way it does it is it looks at the path of the site. Since you can pass in arbitrary URLs, like sometimes if you wanted to pass in a route or something, instead of right now I just have a slash for the home page. But if I wanted to pass in like a news page or something like that, it looks to see if the path starts with whatever our link is, and then it replaces it. It replaces the site URL just so that if the link was written like /news and the actual URL that's getting returned back has some extra stuff, like if it has the dev dot or example.com/news in the link, it'll take care of that. So basically, just gets the path part of the link that you're getting.
So you're trying to prevent against client input error or multiple client inputs, possibly if somebody puts a full URL or a relative URL.
Right. Exactly.
How do you approach training clients about how to? So I think relative URLs are a little confusing to some clients. How do you approach training them when you kind of give them the ability to just create a link to anywhere?
Usually I tell them just to go and copy and paste the URL from the page that they want to link to, and so that's why I take out the site URL from the link. Is that if they went and did that, then I can remove it, so all the links are consistent on the site from whenever a visitor comes in and clicks a link.
Got it.
So
I'll often use just a link it field and let them link to entries or items right as the field.
Yeah, and Linkit's an interesting field type that lets you kind of choose all of these options. Maybe you can speak to that, Steve. I haven't overused that field, but I think it kind of lets you choose the same options that Steven has here, but it's all in one field type.
Yeah, it is. It's you have to code for it though, so it has its own. It would change. It would definitely change this macro a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and this is a situation where a field type is probably
Overkill.
better for that, because this is kind of overkill as far as having to have all these matrix elements and things like that. But the reason why we've done it like this is just to not have the reliance on a third-party plugin, which could be a blessing or a curse. It's obviously a lot of work up front to put the macro together and stuff like that. But I can be pretty sure that whenever I update to whatever version of Craft, that nothing will break either.
Yeah, or your PHP version changes. I've been bit by that a couple times.
Yeah, true. Yeah, that's a good. Because that's something you don't always have control over if a client's kind of setting up server requirements or something like that. So I can get back out of the weeds if we want to go look at how this operates more on the site.
Yeah, as you wish. I think that gave us a good tour of the macro and how you're handling it in the code.
So I'll just populate these other fields real quick. So home, about, project. So what I'm really going to do is have in the secondary nav a contact page and a download. So we have a contact page already set up, which will be an entry type, and then an asset for the download, which will be
some PDF of.
So select an asset, and then you can upload something. I have a just zip file here, and then open a new window, and it's a button, so it'll stand out a little more. And then on primary navigation, I turned off the button for projects, so it won't have a button anymore. And then I think that's pretty good for the primary navigation. So for the footer, that's where people like to stick, privacy policies and things like that. So I'll link to the privacy policy page and the terms of use.
And it looks like you have this structured where all these kind of general pages are in a pages channel. But you could do this if you set some of these up as singles or anything as well. The entry link can link anywhere you have content for.
Right, yeah. And I think that's one of the great benefits of it, is that Like, does the other link field, does that work much like how the link field in the rich text, like the drop down in the rich text field works?
Yeah, sort of. It'll let you link to assets and other things like that.
In the settings, you can kind of choose which types of things do you want to link to, and then on the front end, you get a drop down where you select which thing you want to link to, and it'll kind of the fields you need to do that will auto appear next to it.
Okay, cool. I definitely have to check
it kind of reduces the complexity of the UI up front with several of those.
And that way, a client can't link to something like, a about page in the middle of their catalog. You can limit it to just the catalog entries or whatever section you want.
Okay, cool. Let's save that, and now we got a nice download button up here, contact, home about projects for the primary nav, and then in the footer, privacy policy in terms of use.
Nice.
And they all use, so on the template level, the two top ones both use the navigation macro, so that code's not repeated, more than once. And then for the second one, it's got this class that's set to pull it to the right. And then for the footer, it's just linking through the link block, so it's not going through any other macros. It's going directly to the link block macro here and just putting a little nice dot there.
Yeah, that's probably worth noting is like you don't need the complexity of this macro if you're just outputting a list of things, and you don't need the complexity of all the styles and stuff if you just know exactly what you're outputting. It can just really be a matrix loop outputting titles of buttons and their links. So then, Stephen, pushing this a little farther, I think Steve mentioned this, but like how would you approach when all of a sudden you need a drop-down item in your navigation?
So I would probably add another checkbox or a toggle, a light switch that says include children or something like that. And then on the template level, as I'm moving through them, if it says include children, I would just output the child entries. I'd do something similar to that if I'm doing like a sidebar navigation on a site where it'll loop through the ones you've selected and then just output the children based on, maybe if you're on that page, depending on how it's designed. But if the page, if you're on the parent page, then show the children or something like that, or have a checkbox where the client can just pick and choose when to include child links on like the parent entry. So sometimes I'll put a navigation tab where I have some entry. Actually, I have some. I think I have that here. So on this one,
so you have a structure where you're saying include the children of the structure of the item that you picked.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or you can do it on the matrix itself, so that you can pick and choose as you're building out nav which ones, so it's all in one place. But as an example, if you're looping through the navigation and you just want to build it out automatically based on the structure, sometimes I'll put a field like this where it just says hide from nav, and so whenever you go and fetch the elements, I just check to see if hide from nav is make sure it's not true, and so you basically get all the entries that aren't hide from nav and loop through them.
Got it. Interesting.
So that's how I handle navigation. What about you guys?
I mostly just use A&M Nav, to be honest. It's worked well for me, but I have run into issues with plugin versions and everything like that. So I'm thinking of doing what you're doing here. I'm just trying to figure out how to handle like complex drop downs, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm sorry. I was going to say that you could also add a super table to the matrix and say, so if you wanted the ability to just build out totally arbitrary URLs on the matrix here, you could have a super table that has a field for selecting an entry for each row, and you could have a row that has a field for entry and a field for label or something like that, so that they could build out anything they want.
Right. I've seen people use separate structures for navigation also.
Yeah, I would love to do a whole separate hangout just on navigation and kind of explore from simple to complex, because I think are a lot of options here. And
I think it was really smart of Pixel and Tonic not to build that into the CMS, because it offers such a diversity of ways we could do it now. At first I was like, oh, why can't I do now? Where are my menus? But now I realize, with this diversity of, people trying to solve that issue, you've got a lot of different options to choose from.
Mm-hmm.
For sometimes, in most sites, I have the philosophy on Nav that, don't overcomplicate it. Nobody's moving the homepage link in their template very much, so why are you giving them control over that? And I feel a lot of brochure sites, marketing sites, that pretty much only need what you have here, Stephen, is a couple different matrix fields with a couple different options. And sometimes you'll have a nav with just one, all the things are static except one of them is a drop-down that needs to kind of be the miscellany. So sometimes we'll even have just a separate matrix block for that drop-down to not even complicate, is it a child, is it a not? It's just like, that's your one thing that gets the drop-down, everything else gets lined up. And, just add as many as you want.
Yeah, I've quit asking clients questions like, do you want it to be able to do this or not? Because they'll always say yes, and you'll end up overdeveloping like a huge complexity for them to just use 10% of it, and then you wasted all that time.
Yeah, I'm with you there, and especially for navigation, a lot of times that's something that we take into account really early in the project and develop like the site map and all that. So a lot of times that's not even something that's up for management.
Yeah, that works.
Yeah, exactly. And because if you're working on some designs, some sites, you'll have a lot of constraint up there in the nav. So it's not always the best idea to let clients be able to change links and add an infinite amount and all that.
Cool. All right.
You
Well,
wanna
so navigation was the easy example. So what else can we do with Matrix?
Okay. Well, another thing I like to do is use it as a form builder. So basically, let me widen my screen here. We'll set up a bunch of fields in a matrix: checkbox, file, hidden, instructions. Instructions would just be helpful text, that needs to be between fields. Who it should be sent to: radio, telephone, text area, select, and then a client can build out a form using the native matrix form builder. And then, since live preview's built into the site for free, since you're using Craft, you can kind of preview it as you're going. So I can walk through an example of how this works.
Let's just create a simple contact form or something.
Yeah. So let's see. We'll do text. We want to know the person's name. Let me see here. So on every field.
Use for this.
I'm sorry.
What's that?
I said that's actually a really awesome use for Matrix. I have not thought of that. That's brilliant.
Now, one of the things you have to be, so you can't do this natively with just nothing, but Pixel and Tonic have a contact form plugin that basically takes a from name, a from email, and then I guess the requirements are a from email and a message field. But the message field you can break up into an array of fields by naming the field names with message and then square brackets and whatever your field is. So I got my name, got email address.
And so you're submitting these different types of fields, but the way that I guess it's just kicking out an email. It's not being stored in the database.
Exactly. And now there's also events on contact form, so you can get the on before send event. And if you wanted to have like a form entries channel, you could save the body of the email just for in case, you know, disaster recovery purposes or something like that. But that's a little more complicated. It's text. So let's get something that's not a text field here. So it can take attachments too. So you could add an attachment field here, and it'll just attach it to the email. Text area for a message. And then if you want to get a little fancier, you can do radio buttons and checkboxes. So the difference on these fields, so up to this point, it's just been label, required, and then instructions. So let's see, instructions just show a little helper text underneath it. And then the checkbox field gets a table where you can basically say, you know, favorite food, and give them a bunch of options to select from.
Are you doing any validation with this?
I am. So the only thing that the plugin requires is the message field and the from email address. But I'm using an on before send event to just make sure that any fields that I set are required have some sort of value. I'm not doing anything, you know, checking to make sure that the phone number is actually a phone number, the email address is actually an email address. But it just makes sure that they can't submit an empty form.
Right.
And if you don't want to deal with a plugin, and depending on how important it actually is that they require that you receive the field, you could just use a jQuery validator. And since it puts out required on the field, like the jQuery validate plugin would just stop it from submitting.
Yeah,
but obviously,
HTML5 even has some inputs that are pretty good in several browsers now. To not.
You probably even use like the input mask plugin, or you know, one of the fields that requires a regex pattern.
Yeah, so there's a lot of ways to handle it, and you know, on a lot of sites, they're just kind of. It's not like the information coming through is being used for something, you know, where somebody decides to send a form without the fields. It may not be the end of the world, but you want to try and stop them if they don't know, you know, if they have jQuery enabled or whatever. That use case is pretty simple to do by just throwing in a plugin that checks for the required attribute on the fields. So let's see. I'll save this. The other things that I set on this, so it's outside of the matrix, but on the entry, on the form entry, is a label. So if you don't want it to say submit, you can change it. It'll say send, and then add a message that they'll see once it's submitted. So and then again, like the link block field appears again. You can set where they should be redirected to. Mm-hmm. So if you want them to, you know, fill out this form, get this PDF, then you can direct them to the PDF. One thing to be aware of, I guess, is that whenever you put fields in here that say redirect or success message, if somebody views source, they can actually see that out of the box. You can hash it in Twig to make sure that it's not tampered with if you're, say, setting like a to email or something like that. But if somebody views source, they could see your success message, and you know, if you had something that was sensitive in there and that should only be seen by somebody submitting the form, then you might want to
link to what you just submitted.
Yeah, exactly. You might want to think twice about taking this approach, or write you know, a plugin or a field type that actually encrypts it instead of just putting a hash before the value. So I'll save this, and then we can go to I'll open up the front end so we can see kind of what it does. So if I've required the name and the email address, so if everything's set up right, I should get errors for those two, and I do. So we have a form here, and once they submit it, they fill out these. If there's any character, so if you just do an A and an A, it'll actually work. So depending on what your needs are, you might want to use something that's more better built for being an email sender or a form collection. But I'll go into the code now and show you kind of what's going on there. Anything up to that point that y'all have questions about? Or
No, a neat use case, yeah.
All right, so let's see. I have this forms template here.
I should mention, if anybody watching the Hangout would like to submit a question, please do, and I'll try to get it integrated here. If you do not see the option to submit a question, sometime it kind of pops up as an ad on your screen, so you can refresh the screen and click on it, and it'll open a window where you can post a question.
So in the top of my templates, when I set them up, I include the fields. I've seen people do this different ways, where you can put an object at the top of the field that has your defaults. I just like to put them here, one to see what fields I need to make sure to include whenever I'm using this template, and then also just to set defaults for if I don't set up a field properly, or if I just haven't gotten that far along, it just won't error out, so I can get started a little sooner.
Fred Thompson.
So the part of it, the stop part is all related to the plugin itself. So it submits to the contact form controller here. It's the message. The redirect is that matrix field at the bottom, so it'll just output a link where you want the user to go once they submit the form. The subject is optional. You can set defaults for this in the plugin itself, but on the form you can add a field that says subject. In this case, it's not overridable, but you could set a subject field here where it just outputs the subject, so you can keep track of what form it comes from. So in this case, I'm outputting the form title along with the name of the website it's being sent from. And then the from email. So this part is required by the contact form plugin, but a lot of times, so if you natively, if you submit the form with the from email, it goes in the reply to field, and it'll say like on behalf of the sender's name. So what I do instead usually is just set it to come from the site or from whatever email API, and then include an email field in the body so that the person that gets the email will just see all the content in the body, because otherwise you'd have to use an event or something to get, or JavaScript to copy whatever they put in the from email field and move it down into the body of the message. So this just prevents you from having to do that, but it won't show when you hit reply in the email. If you were replying directly to it, it wouldn't go to whoever actually sent it. So you got to take some good with the bad. And then I'm setting in the hidden field a couple things that I handle in the settings of the plugin. So I override the success flash message, and then the form ID so that I can get the required fields via the before send event. And then the to email here lets you set an email. So by default, the plugin goes to one email, whatever you set in the settings. But we have a field on our entry to where they can set a to email, and these values are all hashed so that if somebody tampers with them, the form won't pass validation, so they can't spam a bunch of people with the form on your site. Then you get to the matrix. So for field and fields, this is our field. This is our field block. So I generate a couple of things. So the ID, I just generate a random number so that whenever you click the label, it'll be associated with the field, and it doesn't matter if they left something blank or something like that. The only purpose of the ID, as far as these forms go, is for the label for attribute to match up with the ID attribute of input, so that whenever you click on the label, it'll select the field. And then I'm checking a value for each form that basically makes sure that the field exists before, just to avoid errors. But then it checks to see if message fields exist. And if it does, that basically means that the form had an error on submission. So it didn't get sent, and we want to capture whatever the value was whenever the user sent it, so that we can repopulate the field whenever there's an error. Then it switches through each block based on the type again. So checkbox and radio use the same markup. Mail route uses select markup, but it also adds a hidden field. And mail route's just it's a field that you can set basically a subject and a drop down, and based on what they select, it'll send out to a different email address. So basically, it passes the select field, and then it passes a field to the plugin to let it know what's the name of the field that has this email address I'm supposed to send the form to. So it checks to see if this mail route key exists whenever it's going to send the email, and if it does, it'll overwrite the to sender and send it to that email address instead of the to sender that was set in the settings.
And that's handled in your little custom plugin that.
Right. Yeah, and
processes.
actually, in that one, it's handled right in the settings file for contact form.
Oh, okay.
So I'll show that next. So text area, select instructions. All of these include a macro that's in a form template or a field. Form.
We all have our form macros.
Yeah. So here's mine. It's if you ever looked at the macros that come with Craft, it's very similar. It just takes the attributes that you need from a field, and in this case, it's prepping them to be suited for the message, the message array that the email that the contact form email needs for the body. So all these settings can be overridden. Like if I wanted to use these fields for something other than the contact form, I could pass in an object, a field object that has a name already set. But if it's not set, then it will take message and it'll put the label of the field in as the key there. So whenever the field's generated, it'll say message first name, message to email, something like that. So the input option is the one that it uses by default. So if a case doesn't match select or text area, then it defaults to the input field, and then it just takes the type. So whether it was telephone or email or some of the HTML5 field types that are all basically a text input but have a different type, it'll populate the type there. The ID will just be that random number that was generated in the loop, and then the name will be something like message label. Value will be blank, or it'll be whatever the user submitted if there was an error. And then you can pass in the class. So in all these examples, I'm using Bootstrap today just so that it shows something that anybody can go take and look at and build a form that looks the exact same way as this one. So there's no custom CSS framework or anything going on these examples. All right, and then whether or not the field's required, it'll tack on the required attribute there. So I'll go view source on the site so you can kind of see how that nasty macro gets outputted. So let's see. This can be really small.
It might be easier to view source in the browser and up the font size.
So all this gobbledygook here just to get this little line of code that says that the class is form control, the value is nothing, the name is message name, the ID is this random number, the type is text, and it's required.
Nice.
So select is a little different only because there's options to go through after setting all the initial name and ID and all that stuff. Then it's looking to that table of fields. So in the back end, so like checkbox has 3 options that have a label and a value. So if I go to checkbox here, it sets up. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm thinking it's probably worth just doing a whole hangout on form macros at some point too. Like they get complex, so.
Yeah, but the good thing about this stuff is that write it once and then forget about it.
Yeah.
Or go and check and see what your parameters are supposed to be and then forget about it.
So now to bring this back to the matrix use case here, you're creating a form with the matrix, and that's that's giving you control in the template of what you need to output, and then you have this set of macros that helps you output the fields in the way that you want them. Out of the box matrix doesn't submit a form, so we need some other way to use that data. You can easily get the input fields on the page, but where do they go from there? You either need to submit them to the database or send them in an email, and you're using the contact form plugin by Pixel and Tonic to send the email here.
Yep, exactly. Any other part of that y'all want to look at? I can do a successful form submission so that we can see what's supposed to happen. Okay, so if I fill this out correctly, then it sends out an email to me that has the value of that form and displays a success message here.
Great.
So, but yeah, the cool thing about that is that, again, there's no dependencies. I guess there is a dependency in this case. There's the contact form plugin. But it gives clients the interface that they're used to, so you don't have to train them on another setup kind of there. It's just the live preview and in the matrix, and obviously for things that have more robust use cases, it's better to look for something more robust. But if you just have a simple contact form, this could get you started.
Yeah, I think that's where the power matrix to me brings the power of kind of an advanced layout editor at the cost of not having the most optimized design for the use case at hand. So everything kind of becomes a set of fields output horizontally as a block. It doesn't become fields placed side by side in the way that's really optimized towards the specific use case you have. But that's okay in a lot of cases. It keeps costs low. It lets you have a lot of flexibility. It keeps things consistent for clients who just need something to work sometimes, and it gives you a lot of power in that space to deliver those things or prototype ideas before you get into the complex code to make something more optimized.
I think the only thing I missed from Expression Engine was the entry form layout. How you could rearrange the fields.
Kind of place 2 of them side by side or something.
Yeah, that's really nice. And there's some plugins that you will see implement that. I know offhand, like Smart Maps has an editor on the field builder that lets you change the percentage width of the fields and put them side by side and things like that. So that would definitely be something cool to be able to customize. You'll see, especially once we get into the appearance side of or the like layout builder, the matrix blocks themselves in the back end can have like a bunch of stuff on them. So it could definitely be overwhelming. It'd be nice to be able to collapse fields or put them in tabs or something like that. Which they have some plugins and things that do that as well.
Yeah. All right. Well, shall we keep moving to the? We even have a comment asking about page builders. So why don't we move on to the layout builder example?
All right. All right. Pages. So.
Yeah, and David, follow up if you have a specific question. We'll let Stephen demo his layout builder for starters there.
All right, so when it comes to the content side of things, really the sky's the limit. Sometimes sites will be good with just a couple of text and image fields and nothing too complicated. But then sometimes you have news listings and things like that, news banners, carousels. So the number of blocks you can include on the content block side of things could get can get pretty well, you could have a ton of them.
We see your matrix field has shifted from being a horizontal layout to a vertical drop-down.
Yeah, and so this one's not even as bad as they come, but here I break it down into new section, which is things like if you want to add a background color or some spacing or change the gutter on the grid or something like that. Or just make sure that all your blocks, all your matrix blocks are clearing properly. You can put a new section that just says like make sure that none of my floats get jacked up beyond this point. Text is it's a rich text field for adding things like the content for the page, which most people think is pretty important. Images, line, just a horizontal rule. Carousel is every client's favorite banner for the home page or section landing pages and things like that. The form that we just created we can pull in the middle of the page. Video, column, which columns just for nesting. It'll make sense once we build a couple tools, but you could take all of these sections here on another section of the site like called snippets and just put some pretty complicated layout into a column and then control how that gets displayed on the page, or if you need to reuse a call to action or something like that. And then talking about like listings and things like that, we could display some team members or the news on this page. So by default, when I use this layout builder, the first section is already open. So if we wanted to change the color of the page, I could set it on the first section, and you can see, well, you probably can't see because that one's smoke is very light, but light blue, you can set some colors, or of course Craft has the color field itself, which you could pick an arbitrary color. But I'm just setting them in a drop down with a hex value, hexadecimal value, and outputting from a pre-selected range of colors so that we can stay on brand.
Yeah, like pink and yeah.
Exactly. So I can get started by adding some text here, and by default my fields go full width, and I'll take some copy. So within this text box, you get all the power of redactor, so you can set your basic styles for text and have clients add in the main content for the page. And the great thing about this is if they don't want to deal with the layout builder and all of its complexity, they can paste a page of content from here and call it a day.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of times we do a lot of migrations, and one of the challenges that people run into with migrations is when migrating to Craft, they want to use Matrix, but they're coming from just a one-time WYSIWYG setup, and frequently will import all of that content into a matrix block called text, so that like kind of all the legacy content is just this like messy WYSIWYG thing, and then the new content can use the power of the other fields, or we'll do that as a separate entry type or something to just keep it in the back.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, text is a good catch-all field for that.
And so I add an image above that, and we'll start to see a layout develop here. So again, that's full width. Maybe we don't want to be greeted with a giant 4x3 image when we hit the page. So I'm using a super table here to add breakpoints. So it's the super table is broken down into screen size, column size, offset, and position. So you can change it for different breakpoints. And we'll say instead of full width that we want this to go half width. And let's see. So usually by default in my templates, I will set the text field to go basically auto, to where it'll have a float none, so that it'll just take up whatever extra space is left over from the block before it. And let's see. Right now it's wrapping, but I usually also give them an option for whether or not the text should wrap. But for now, I'll just delete that text, and I can go in later how I handle all that. So now we got an image there, and maybe we decide that at medium-sized screens, we want it to go just a third of the page. Then you can kind of get an idea, and that you can show the clients this too, that they can just resize the layout, the live preview window, to see how their layouts are affecting the overall page.
It's a lot of power. You trust the users more than me, I think.
Well, you know, it's not for everybody, and sometimes it's just a tool for the agency itself to build product pages and things like that, where
you get change order fees for fixing it.
Yeah. You know, a lot of the times, by the time the actual layout's built, the client will maybe want to focus on the copy, and so they can just come in and tweak copy on all these blocks without affecting.
Yeah, or the patterns they're using are consistent enough that it's really just copying the pattern from another place that already has it right or something.
So are you actually resizing that image, or are you just changing the size of the container that it's in?
On this site, I am just scaling the image. It's not cropping, but I usually crop them based on the column size. So I'll go through the array, the column sizes on each block that has an image, and I'll crop them based on the column size of its container, and set up like the different sources for.
So Breakpoint would actually pick a different image.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And on I can pull up another example after this, but usually also let the client, or whoever is managing the content, whether it be a designer or a client, or just us internally, they can double click an image and choose an image so you'll have your main image that'll be applied to, say, your small breakpoint or your desktop breakpoint, depending on how you set up the defaults, and then the client can add an image for, say, the small breakpoint and the large screen breakpoint to the default image, and it'll pull that image if you wanted to have a different ratio or a different image altogether.
That's awesome, dude. So you're actually editorializing the breakpoints.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool.
And if the macros before looked bad, then the picture was really nasty. So I'll put together a couple more examples of blocks here, just so it'll start to take shape. But I'm going to put some banners on this page so we can get a carousel going. And then in this case, it doesn't look that great. For one, our background's red, which is kind of gross. So I changed that back for the section. But it would kind of be nice to get some space between that banner. So what I'll do now is add a new section above it that is now containing the content right here. And I'm going to go ahead and make, so all the settings for the first section are on a tab whenever you're not in live preview mode called appearance. And so we'll not contain the first section. And then for that grid, we can say no gutter so that it goes off to the edges. And on a normal site, I would handle this kind of stuff smarter, knowing that this is a carousel and all that, and change the spacing appropriately. But you can also add styles to the section, so I can take off the padding on the top and bottom so that it fits up a little better. And I always want to be conscious of how we're handling these things, because basically set smart defaults, because I know no client wants to come back here and change all these settings and stuff like that. So we'll try to set up smart defaults and then let them override it if they'd like.
So your sections are really your rows in the code? It's the row
yeah, I can go to the code right now. So this is all done in the index template right now. And so we open the first section before we loop through the fields. So it's going to a template that has whether or not the section should be contained, what the background color is, and all that. And then we start to loop through the field. So it checks to see what the entry is set to, so whether it's set to contain section or not. So it can open and close divs based on if there's an extra div that says section contained, for example, the next time that it hits a new section block, it knows that it needs to close 2 divs instead of 1 or something like that. And then for the entry blocks here, the content blocks, we're looping through, and instead of doing the switch statement, it is including a template in the blocks folder that's named after the block type. So over here it includes, I have a template for carousel, column, form, image, line, news, new section, team, text. And it's just grabbing that template based on what the block type is as it loops through them.
This is a really cool structure because you can now use those same 4 lines of code, 16 through 20 there, and put them anywhere you want, and you can kind of have this builder appear.
Yep,
Can you
exactly.
explain the section code again?
Yeah, so I'm going to go into that template now, which again, this is where things get gross. But I only write this once, and this is a template that needs to be revisited anyway because it's pretty bad, but it works. So it's got the block, it's got whether or not there's a background color, background image, the styles, checkboxes, whether or not it's contained, and whether or not the previous section is contained. And then whether or not it's the first section. So you'll notice in the code, whenever I pass in the include outside of the matrix, I'm saying that this is the first section. And what that means to the new section template is that it doesn't need to close any divs. So every subsequent time this template's loaded, it's going to close 3 divs, 1 for the row, 1 for the container, and 1 for the section. And depending on your CSS and what framework you're using, or if you're using a framework, this could come down to be 1 div instead of 3. It's all flexible. But so this is where the actual section comes into play. If there's a class passed in, it'll take the class. Actually, we're setting the class up here. So this is written pretty vertically right now, but it basically takes your section styles checkbox, and the values that are stored in the section styles are the actual classes. So basically, it's looking to see if it's an array, and if it is, it's just flattening it out to a string of all the checkboxes that they check. So you could have something like in this case, we're getting a class that says no spacing top and no spacing bottom. So whenever the sections output, it's got a class here that I'll go put in Sublime Text that says it's a section with no spacing on the top and no spacing on the bottom. So then in CSS, we're taking off the padding on the top and bottom. And then it checks to see if there's a background color. And due to the native field, the color field, it checks to make sure that it's not solid black, because on the native field, that means that, it could mean that nothing's selected. So basically, the client would have to pick slightly not black if they wanted black. But in this case, we're using a drop down, so it's just going to output the background color field if it's there. And then whether or not, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Steven, we have a clarification question. What is the section field? Is it a matrix field part of the is it a matrix field or part of the overall matrix field?
It's both. So the first one is just a normal, it's not even a field. It's just a group of fields that make up what is on the section matrix. So I'll go out of live preview mode here. And there's this appearance tab that has the section settings. So contain section, section spacing, section styles, and then the grid gutter. So that's for the first section that's output on a page, which is outputted always by default. So they don't have to add the first section. Then on the matrix, we have those same fields repeated. So new section, contain section, section spacing, and all that. So so it's both, uses the same template. It's just included, and it passes in so for the first one on the page before it goes through the loop.
Yeah, you didn't want the client to be able to delete that first one and break the whole layout.
Right. And so instead of passing in a block, it's passing in the entry.
Right.
And then since the fields are named the same, it's just taking them off the entry and applying the same logic.
Right.
Okay, so hopefully that.
Let us know if that doesn't answer it, David.
So that all of this stuff right here that's highlighted is set up this one little class to put out a string of classes on the section. So that can certainly be simplified as well. But then this next part does some styles. So since we're not storing any of this in a style sheet because it's produced on the entry itself, we're putting a style on the section div. So if there's a background color, we're outputting the background color. If there's a background image, we're outputting the background image on the section. And then it checks to see when it's doing that if the image file name contains @2x. And if it does, it divides the size of the image in half so that it'll display at like retina quality. Okay. And the other thing it checks for is that the client didn't select background cover as an option because we also have a class in the CSS that lets them size a instead of specifying a specific background size, they can specify a background cover and let it take over the whole section.
Okay. Steven, I've got a couple more.
Parallax with this. You can do the parallax blocks with this pretty easily.
Right. Yeah.
So, Steven, one clarification. So the first one is the default, and the others are dividers. You're not actually nesting matrix within matrix.
No, nothing's being nested. So
go on.
Oh, I see. So yeah, so the sections are always meant to be outside of the previous section.
Okay. And then A note on your layout, are you using Flexbox?
I'm not on this. Sometimes we'll have, if we have a block type like a call to action or like a tile or something where we have an image with text next to it, we'll make a special block that lets them put text in an image, and then on that one block we'll do like Flexbox to center the text next to the image.
All right.
But there's no reason specifically why we're not doing Flexbox. We just haven't done it.
Okay.
For a whole layout. All right, so the next div that it gets to, so it's got the containing section that has the images and background color, and then the next one is just whether or not it should be contained or go to the edge of the screen. And I don't usually use Bootstrap, but I just picked it for this since so I didn't have to also explain like my CSS framework. But I'm overriding some Bootstrap stuff right here, basically saying if the grid gutter dropdown says that the row shouldn't have a gutter, then put no padding on the container div. And then the last div it outputs is the grid, where again it's looking for it's basically outputting row and then seeing if there's any extra classes that go on the grid. Some sites I'll have checkboxes that say vertically center items in this section or something like that, and that would go on put a class on the grid if they hit a checkbox.
Okay.
All right, so all that is what you use to get just the section part of the site. So,
right.
so I'll go into the columns next. So this column logic is reused on every block, so the client can size. So right now it's sized to auto, which is why we're getting this weird wraparound on this site. But if I go and specify that, let's see, 6 of 12, so it should be 6 of 12 and 8 of 12. I can set that on this text, and it'll correct that little wraparound there. 8 of 12. So with this, you could, instead of just doing two images next to, or an image next to a text, you could add another block that has, another image for that other side, or something like that. But we usually stick with the kind of like image on the left, text on the right, text on the left, image on the right, and then using a size of auto on the text in the CSS, we can make it where they're basically determining the size of the layout of the grid columns based on whatever block isn't the text, so that whenever they paste text in, it just sizes appropriately.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to add a breakpoint for small to fix that and set it to, I think, 6 of 12.
It seems we have the matrix kind of being used for two things here. One is blocks of different type of content that we might want to organize in any way, and then two is this where they're all positioned, or how they're positioned in relation to one another.
Right, yep, exactly.
And you're using this super table is kind of your chosen design pattern to help manage that.
Yeah, and on a lot of sites, if we want to simplify, we'll just decide that at a certain, on smaller screens, it's all going to flow, and they just set the column size for one breakpoint, and then everything beyond that is just that size instead of.
Yeah, it seems like you might only allow a 4/8 split or a 3/9 split on your grid. So if you had predictable kind of layouts, you wouldn't need all of these options. You could guide people to less choices.
Yeah. let's see. I don't know what. Oh, okay. I had the breakpoint set wrong on the second one, which is why my first one wasn't working right. So now I have the 6 of 12 and the 6 of 12 on mobile, and on medium screens it goes to 4 of 12 and 8 of 12. The important thing is that it adds up to 12. And you can see how the layout shifts between those two breakpoints.
Yeah.
So
then, go on.
Oh, go ahead. I'll answer your question.
I was going to, I didn't want to derail you if you have another part of your example here. I was going to, at some point I'd like to start asking the question of does this only happen in one section, or how do we start thinking about this as we move to multiple sections?
So that's a good question. So a lot of times I will reuse the same structure across multiple sections. So on the news section, if they wanted to do like editorial style layouts, they have that option. If they want to do a press release, they'll just paste the text in the text field and call it a day, or have a different block type that's called maybe we'll make two entry types. One's like editorial and the other one's default or basic, and it's just text based, or it just has like a text and an image field or something like that. But one of the use cases I find handy for the matrix is also like listings. If you wanted to have on the news page just a list of news articles, and you have, in the past we'd have a separate template that either had content blocks or didn't, but then you had to decide, do we want the content blocks to go, do we want the content that the client needs to add, like if they want to have a brief message before you see whatever the listing is, you just put a field and they put text at the top, and then it's good for a couple months, and then they want to put something at the bottom of the page too, maybe like a disclaimer or something like that. So one of the things that you can do is make block types for your listings as well. So like if I wanted to put the team here, we could, let's see, put them in a team block, and then display them on a page like this, and then whenever they on the team page would basically be managed inside the same structure instead of having like a channel with a separate template type.
Yeah, we've noticed this on.
Go ahead.
We've noticed this on larger sites. You kind of get this problem of, okay, we've built this nice layout builder. It exists in one section. It has 10 different blocks. Now we want to use it in another section, but we only need 8 of the blocks there. And here we might even want to use the same block in another section, but we only need 1 of those blocks over there. And I think one approach to this is you accept it as a data entry task, and you start creating fields and for each use case. And if you create multiple matrix fields with the same named fields, you can use the same template code to output them all. Another approach is, I've only looked at this more recently and not as familiar with it, but Pimp My Matrix is a plugin by Supercool that allows you to just have one big matrix field with 20 different blocks, but then choose which blocks appear in your different sections. So you could kind of build your whole site around this idea of one big matrix field for all the different layout components, and only help keep the UI slim for people in different sections by only allowing the blocks that you want to be seen there.
Yeah, that's what I've been doing lately, and it works really well. One thing that I'll do additionally to this is I'll create like a block type for an include. So if I need to do like a complex, here are the latest specials kind of thing, I can just put that anywhere in the middle of all this long form content. That eliminates the need for like any sort of custom routing or specialized templates outside of this. So if I've got if you can break in and out of the rows with that, you can pretty much make anything this way, which is the way everybody wants to move, I'm sure.
Yeah, we've run into that too with on Straight Up Craft. There's some kind of large data pages, like there's a field guide that has like a listing of every craft field and the front end way to output it and the the input way to submit it as a form, and it's this messy template in Twig, with lots of verbatim tags to actually build the page, but we still want the benefits of kind of the chrome of that page, the header and the footer and the author, whatever else is kind of going on there. And so we have something like you described, an input field, where it's really all the work for the post itself has kind of been done in a separate template as a Twig template, and then it's just like a link to a file
right.
as a block in our layout editor, because it lets us have the rest of those other block options for all the rest of the content.
Yeah, I use the template select field type for that, and then it just, it works.
Oh, yeah. And so I think another question we discussed here on this topic of reusing across sections was, how is everybody? I think this Pimp My Matrix method of just create one big matrix field and enable or disable the matrix blocks is a nice approach, because you don't have to create a bunch of matrix fields and subfields in every case. But what other ways do we have to kind of reuse blocks? Going from section to section is one problem, but what about going from site to site when you create nice blocks on one site and you want to reuse them all on the next site?
Yeah, it's great. Great question, because we, a lot of the blocks up until the team block here, every one of these blocks would be something that we would use on another site. So the way that we handle it is on the loop for our field blocks, content blocks. We first check for an entry that's a template that's in a submodule that's called content blocks, that has all of our like text and video and image and like those blocks. And then if the template doesn't exist there, then it goes and checks another folder called custom content blocks that has the site-specific ones. So we can start out with a bunch of blocks that we use on every site, and then just add in the ones that are new. And with the Field Manager plugin, we can import a basic set of fields and block types and get started without having to go in and make all these super tables and add, do all the busy work. Basically, it'll be taken off our shoulders.
Right. So you mean you're managing your imports on a global and a client level then?
I think you had two parts there, right? Stephen, you have the templates in the folder are all tidily in the blocks folder, and you include those blocks as you need in your more specific website templates. So you can take that blocks folder and just copy it to a new site.
Right.
And then within the database, you're using Field Manager, the plugin Field Manager. And does that plugin allow you to export your fields from one site and import them into another?
Yeah, it does. I can run over to that real quick. So you just select the field that you want. So in this case, we went to content blocks. And then you click export, and it just downloaded a file. That's a nice JSON blob of everything in the content block. So it's got the instructions, it's got the settings, it's got everything. And then back in the Field Manager, you click on Import, and you just paste that code there, and it'll create all those blocks at once.
Nice.
So you could also, manipulate it to, do like a find and replace, or use a bunch of cursors in Sublime Text or something to alter these fields all at once, or add a bunch of slightly different fields or slightly similar fields that are a little bit different in a bulk manner. Yeah,
you need to make sure that the field types and everything between your two sites are the exact same versions, though. You will end up with, it won't import them.
So you're saying if Super Table has added a feature and has a different setting or something like that, you can run into a problem?
Yeah. Sometimes the JSON export will be different between the two sites. So, yeah, but this is awesome.
Yeah, definitely a time saver. So, so I think what you're saying is that you should always keep your site completely up to date, so that then you can just export it on the new project and you don't have to worry
Yeah.
about it.
And can you update, David asked, can you update existing fields?
Unfortunately, you can't. So at least not that I'm aware of. So it's kind of like get it all together, do it once, and then you're back to the manual editing and adding of block types. And
But you can't import just one field and then change the handle on it if you need to do that, but you'll lose all your data. It's only at the beginning, like you're saying.
right, and also you can't do like sub, a block inside of a matrix, as far as I know.
Mm-hmm. All right. All right, that was a slight sidebar.
Well, how about I would just go to a page that already has a bunch of blocks in it, and we can kind of look at them. And if y'all want to go into any of the code and see what's happening, we can take a look at that as well. So on this page, we have a carousel block at the top. Let's see, a new section, and then a generic message here that is just centered 8 of 12, so it doesn't go full width. And then still in that same section, we have a picture block with the placeholder image and a caption. And I can show you, so with the styles, you can change based on what you check. You can alter the image on the fly. And kind of, if you wanted to have an option here that said drop shadow or border, you can let clients kind of change it, but have a set basic styles for the site so that it's consistent. And then on to another section. Hope that circle doesn't look good on a not square image. So here I pulled in my team block again. And so this is kind of neat, if I can find it in the side. So I have a text block. So it's a yellow section that's contained, and then a text block that has just a H2, and then this line here is another block that just outputs an HR. And then I have my team, and so I can choose between two formats, cards or list, and the list would be more for like a page that listed like headshots in their bio, except I don't have any bios inputted for these people right now. Excuse me. And then you can choose here, in addition to the column size, how many people you want on each row. So if we wanted to list them straight down the page, we could say one person per row, or have them 2 up, and so on and so forth, and then swap between the two layouts and go from having kind of headshots with the person's name and position to having a full-on bio of the person. Another thing that we do with a field like this is if we're dealing with news entries. I have this field here that's it's not actually coded on this site, but where you can set priority entries. So you could say show 6 news articles, and then it would output the 6 most recent news articles, but then put this one like featured article at the top, and it would display that one first, and then it would go and it would merge the IDs of the priority articles with the IDs of the rest of their articles, and then it would output them all. On this side, I don't have any news together, but we could jump over to an example of that later on if people are interested in seeing that in action. And then we get into a more complicated layout. So we have this other block that's just called column, and it takes content blocks from another section called snippets and imports them all into a row. And then it just takes however many snippets you add, and it makes them each their own column. So if I remove this one, it'll be a 50-50 column. And if I remove this other one, it'll be just a single column. And you could reuse that to have the same content on multiple pages or
sidebars or something.
Yeah, exactly. Or call to action. So like this next section that's red is the exact same thing. It's just an entry called call to action where we can say, take action, join the pledge, sign the pledge, give us your email, and then include that on the bottom of every page as you wish.
So yeah, I had this question on my list. So here's a scenario that we've run into in these layout builders is sometimes you really don't like. The only thing you need the layout builder to do is mark a point in time. So in the case of call to action, it's another snippet. It's already created. You just want to input the call to action in the middle of your page somewhere. You don't want somebody to have to name the call to action and have it. In your case, you have several possible snippets. So you've got a simple matrix block that allows you to relate to a snippet. And I think that's one use case for this. What do you do if you don't need variability here at all? You just need a call to action to be output or some form to be output or some breakpoint to happen, but you really don't need any fields to control what it's happening. Do you just create an empty matrix block?
Yeah, that's exactly what we do, and we would name it like a good example. Say you have a site for a nationwide company. They have a bunch of locations, and you have this one form that's basically put in your zip code and find the nearest location. Then we would have a matrix block called find a location, and we would just include it. And so there would be nothing dynamic in that case, and we would just go pull the template from the content blocks folder and display this form that searches for the nearest location. So I think that's a great way to still give them control over where it goes, when they include it, and all that, but not have the burden of managing a bunch of fields to get it to display exactly right.
Yeah, go on, Steve.
That's the interesting thing. I handle columns the way that you're handling sections also. So I'll use the block to open and close the column the same way you're opening and closing the sections. So I can say here's a column, and then here are all the blocks, and then here's the next column, and here are the following blocks. And I have the same, if it's the last or what was the previous one, to open and close those column blocks. And then that way I'm not having to use a separate section of content to pull into a column.
Does your way also solve the need for the how many columns is this? So in your way you have an opening and 1, 2, or 3 blocks and then a closing. And so in your template you can count, this is where the row opens, it should be 1, 2, or 3 columns wide, this is where the row closes?
Well, yeah, the block you can set how many columns wide it is, and it'll close on the last if there's no column. So the very last block knows if there was a previous column set, and it'll close it the same way he showed the sections before.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think that's a great way to handle it as well. We've gone back and forth on a lot of methods, and sometimes we see kind of how much of a burden it is, and then we reapproach it. So a lot of the ways that I'm even showing here definitely aren't something that I would consider to be like the best way to handle something necessarily. Sometimes I just like to give different things a go and see in the end, like once the team starts putting in content, how it goes, and then adjust it from there.
Yeah, I feel that these use cases we're talking about here, to me, get into this gray area of how usable has the pattern we've chosen made it for the end user. So even the empty block, we just need something to output. Well, an easy way to do it is just create a block, because in our template code we can say, does the call to action block exist? Well, output the call to action, which is this totally separate template. But in the layout, you've got this empty block in the interface all of a sudden. And when you hit add thing, it's just a header and a blank area. And that's kind of it. And I feel you kind of start crossing a line there where, okay, if it's keeping costs low and making it easy to do, great. But at what point are you really making abusing the power of the matrix and reducing the usability of the constructs, or adding too many options to the content editor for the end user to choose between?
Yeah, definitely a balance. And we've we launched a site recently where we had taken an approach that was it was more broken apart than this. Is a little too crazy, where we wanted there to be like more customization on headings and things like that inside of text areas, and so we had to put headings as their own block type separate of text, which turned out to be really burdensome when you have people that just want to take the text and paste it where it needs to go, and instead of being able to do that, they have to copy everything up into the next heading and then paste it in. So definitely, sometimes get a little ahead of ourselves and have to adjust and make it for the content editors.
Is have a simple page type and then the page builder type. You can always create entry types for a client for a basic use, and then have the page builder type that the content layout editors.
Yeah, it might matter how much you want to enforce brand as well. I think in the case of the headings, we'll sometimes have heading and subheading fields, which are just a plain text field. Alternatively, you could have a rich text field and then modify the options in the rich text toolbar to only allow heading 2 or 3. I think that gets tricky because frequently you want the H1 tag to be the title of the entry, and then when you get into rich text fields, you don't want an H1 option in your drop-down of headings. You want an H2 and H3 option or something like that, and so then you have to modify the toolbar to allow somebody to be using the rich text field thoughtfully. But then it just adds complexity as well, so there's a fine line there.
Yeah, definitely. So from a visual point, this is kind of the page. This is a contact form that's been included at the bottom. And then I was trying to get news ready before this, but didn't have a chance to get some news articles there. But you can see you can pull in those forms that I created also in a matrix as an entry, and then submit from there, include it on multiple pages, or only include it once but have the control over where it goes and all that.
All right. Great. Well, yeah, I think this really demonstrates the power of the layout builder, Stephen, and you've kind of gone, I think you've gone, in the direction of customizing all the columns and all of these other details. So really, as we all approach these from our own problems which we're trying to solve, we can go as far in this direction as we want in customizability or keep things simple, but this really demonstrates how far you can take it if you want to give this level of flexibility to a client or have it on a project for yourself.
Mm-hmm. And you can cause a lot of damage too. If we look at the queries on this page, it's probably something ridiculous.
Yeah. You want to look at the queries on the page?
Yeah, that's what I'm going to do right now. Let's see. Let me refresh.
I think it's a worthy conversation to keep in mind because Craft makes it so easy to do this stuff that immediately people are asking for matrix within matrix, but as soon as you start doing that, the number of queries starts to just shoot through the roof.
Yeah, so this page right here already has 163 queries, and there are no image transforms on this page. So if there were, especially if you talk about like having multiple images for different breakpoints and things like that, you could see that shoot up exponentially from there as well. So definitely a situation to take care of, to keep in mind some performance optimizations and things like that. Or don't give as much flexibility as is possible just because it's possible.
Great. All right. Any final questions out in the audience? Please post them. And any final comments from you, Stephen or Steve?
Great job. Nice work.
Yeah, thank you. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer them, or shoot me an email, or hit me up in the craft Slack or anything. If you have a different way of doing things, you know, I'm all ears on how other people are solving these same problems. I'd like to know what else is out there as well.
Cool. Well, thank you everybody for coming out. This has been a straight up hangout. We do this every week on Fridays. We'll have a topic posted shortly for next week, and see you then.
Thank you.